Welcome back to History English Stories. Today, we bring you a true story from the past. One that's strange, powerful, and maybe a little forgotten. Listen closely, follow the subtitles, and let your English grow. One mystery at a time. They marched into the fog and never came out. 4,800 men, hardened by war, shielded in iron, disciplined by Rome's most brutal code gone. No graves, no trophies, no reports. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't drift but sinks. That settles in the soil and grows roots until no one remembers what was buried. They were known as Legio IX Hispanitha, 9th Legion. Veterans of Gaul, scourge of Britain. A unit carved from the old blood of the Republic, tempered in civil wars, polished by conquest. By the time the 9th reached Britannia in the 1st century A.D., they were legends in their own right. They had crushed rebels in Hispania, earned scars in Africa, and marched beneath Caesar's eagle itself. Their standard was more than cloth, and gold was myth. In Britannia, they were both sword and shadow. The Roman occupation had met fierce resistance from the native tribes, the Iceni. The Brigantes, the Silures names whispered in Latin with the tone of vermin, but fought with the respect of worthy foes. The 9th had clashed with Boudica herself. In the rebellion of 60 A.D., they were nearly annihilated, when she led her armies in burning Londinium and slaughtering Roman settlers. But even then, they survived, rebuilt, retaliated. Their reputation darkened but unbroken. They were stationed in Abruzzo, modern-day York, a cold outpost of Roman civilization. Surrounded by hills, mist, and the watchful silence of a land that had never asked to be ruled. From Abruzzium, the 9th kept order. They patrolled roads cut through ancient forests, oversaw taxes, quelled revolts, and built walls. Always building walls, because Britannia never truly slept beneath the eagle. Then, sometime after 117 A.D., they left the fort. Some say they marched north, into Caledonia, the wilds of what we now call Scotland. A land of jagged rocks and darker legends. They marched to confront unrest, or to build a road, or to punish a tribe, or to disappear. What we know is this. After that march, they vanish from Roman records. There is no return logged, no orders filed. No commendations, no letters to Rome, no survivors. Even the inscriptions, meticulously carved stones that marked legions and legates, stop mentioning them. Where there was once carved pride, now there is absence. And Rome, so obsessed with its own victories, said nothing. In the centuries that followed, questions piled higher than ruins. What happened? Were they ambushed? Betrayed? Assimilated? Did they fall to swords or snow? Were their standards captured and paraded through northern tribal fires? Or did they break, scatter, abandon the eagle in the mud, and melt into the mist like ghosts? The mystery took hold not just of historians, but of poets, of soldiers, of dreamers. Because the 9th wasn't just a legion, it was a symbol. A reminder that even the most disciplined, most feared, most prepared can vanish. That Rome, itself eternal, concrete, iron-bound Rome, had blind spots. And in the midst of Britannia, those blind spots became legend. In the coming days, a new governor would arrive in Britain. New walls would be built. A new legion, the 6th, would take the 9th's place. Rome would march on, as it always did. But for those who paid attention, for those who read the lists, who remembered the names carved in stone, a silence lingered. The 9th had gone north, and they had not come back. The fog never left Eburucum. It clung to the stones like breath, filled the spaces between soldiers' words, and blurred the line between watchfulness and weariness. The 9th had held this fort for years, and still they were strangers to the land. The air bit through wool and bronze. The silence of the Moors was different than silence in Romet, was ancient, patient, and unafraid of armies. Inside the stone walls, campfires flickered beneath the timber roofs of the barracks. Messengers came and went, Orders were whispered, rarely shouted. Legionaries oiled their blades and watched the clouds move low over the hills. Something in the air had changed, though no one named it. Soldiers feel before they see, and what they felt wasn't fear, it was friction. Between past and present, between control and doubt. Lucius Silenus, the legate of the Ninth, had served under Trajan. He was no fool. His face was carved in old lines and war scars, the kind that came not from battle, but from endurance. He believed in the Republic still, even as emperors changed like winds. He had earned the respect of his men, not with speeches, but with survival. To them, he was the spine of the Ninth, a man who had seen Gaul burn and still woke up calm. But even Silenus watched the northern horizon longer these days. Reports had come in, villages torched, supply runners missing, trade envoys ambushed on roads that had been safe for years. Scouts spoke of hill tribes gathering Caledon, Mavinicones, Minot clans that had once scattered before Roman standards, now moving with new purpose. There were rumors of a war chief uniting the tribes. No name, just stories. Whispers shared over firelight and buried by dawn. Silenus brought the reports to the governor, but Rome was busy. Emperor Hadrian had risen after Trajan's death, and the empire was shifting focus inward. Defenses, not expansion. Harmony, not glory. Silenus was told to contain the unrest, to project strength, to act with discretion. But discretion meant marching blind into mist. In the barracks, soldiers passed the time with dice, wine, and memory. Many were born in provinces far from this fog-covered land: Syria, Numidia, Thrace, Hispania. They spoke Latin with different rhythms. They sang in tongues that no longer had cities. But they fought under one eagle, and that bound them more than origin. Marcus Flavius Cotta, a centurion, had buried more men than he could name. He no longer believed in causes, only in discipline. His helmet was dented on one side, a wound from the Boudiccan rebellion. He joked less than most, but when he did, the men laughed louder because it meant they had time to laugh. Titus Rufus, a standard-bearer, carried not just the eagle, but the fear of losing it. The eagle of the Ninth was plated in gold, its wings outstretched, its talons clutching thunderbolts. No symbol in the empire was more sacred. To lose it was not just defeat, it was dishonor, unthinkable. Rufus cleaned it nightly, as if protection could be polished into metal. There were others, young recruits, tired veterans, men writing letters to wives they hadn't seen in years. They joked about wolves, about barbarian women, about the cold. But in the quiet, some prayed. Even those who had stopped believing still whispered to Mars before battle. And though none said it, they felt the air thicken with something they didn't know how to name. 2 days before the march, a scout returned with eyes wide and tongue dry. He had ventured near the Great Glen, hoping to map an old trade path. He found nothing but cairns and silence. He claimed he saw a fire burning blue in the hills. He said he heard drums that didn't echo like Roman music. He said he wasn't followed but kept checking over his shoulder. Silenus said nothing to the men. A commander cannot afford uncertainty. But that night he did not sleep. On the day of the march, the Ninth prepared like they always had. Units checked formation. Horses were readied. Provisions packed. The standard was raised in the square, and every man saluted. From the outside, it looked like routine. But a black bird circled the fort as they left. Some noticed, some didn't. No one spoke of the dreams they had the night before. And as the gates opened, and the first row stepped forward into the rising mist, a soldier at the rear turned his head one last time, looking not at the hills ahead, but at the walls behind. As if he already knew he would not see them again. The first days were quiet, too quiet. It's a kind of quiet that wasn't peace, but waiting. The Ninth moved like they had in 100 campaigns before, in column, in rhythm, in discipline. Shields slung, eyes scanning. They were trained for war, not weather, but Britannia tested both. The wind came in sideways, sharp with peat and pine. The sky hung low, always threatening rain or worse. They moved north beyond Abruga, past the last outposts of stone and command. Past farms built by settlers clinging to Roman dreams. Then past the farms, into country that held no dreams at all, just hills, thick with heather and dark forests, tangled like uncut hair. Every step forward was a step deeper into something Rome did not understand, perhaps never would. Silenus rode near the front, silent. He gave few orders, only nods and signals. The scouts rode ahead in pairs. The baggage carts creaked behind. Even the horses seemed uneasy, snorting at tree lines that hid too much. Campfires were built each night, but the men sat closer than usual. No laughter, no singing. Just firelight on iron helmets and the low scrape of knives on whetstones. The forest narrowed, trees pressed in. The old Roman roads became paths, then trails, then half-remembered hunting routes carved by men who never left maps. The mist came down and stayed. Not the drifting fog of Ibericum, but the clinging kind that hung in armored joints and deadened sound. The world felt small, dense, pressed inward, and things began to go missing. First, it was just a mule, one from the baggage train. No sign of struggle, no tracks. The beast was tethered, then it wasn't. The men grumbled barbarian thieves, probably. Then a tent collapsed in the night, ropes cut clean. No wind, no animal prints. Then came the silence, the total kind. The forest without birds. The wind without leaves. Titus Rufus, the standard-bearer, said nothing aloud. But at dusk he began sleeping with the eagle beside him, wrapped in cloth. He told his tent mate it was because the rain might damage the gold, but the night before he dreamed the eagle was taken. Not broken dash, just ... lifted. Quietly Cotta, the centurion, began walking the camp perimeters longer than usual. His boots left circles in the mud where no one else walked. He checked the pickets twice each shift, then again. Once he found a guardsman asleep, except he wasn't. His eyes were open. His pulse was gone. No wound, no sound. Just a man lying beside his spear, like he'd fallen into some place sleep couldn't reach. They burned the body at first light. No rites, no words. Silenus didn't allow it. One death does not change the mission, he said. But it did. The men walked slower. Helmets sat lower on brows. The woods no longer looked like terrain. They looked like a trap. Then came the signs. On the fourth day, they reached a river they couldn't name. On its bank was a wooden effigy tall, thin, wrapped in animal sinew. At its base were feathers, bones, and a Roman gladius driven into the earth. The blade was old, rusted, but unmistakably Roman. It was not theirs. No one claimed it. No one touched it. Silenus gave the order to move on. But the night after, the dream spread. Men whispered of faces in the trees, of drums in the distance that stopped the moment you listened. One claimed he saw figures moving through the fog, just beyond the light tall, naked, smeared with ash. Another swore he heard Latin, softly spoken, but backwards. And still they marched, because that is what legions do. Because order is louder than fear. Until it isn't. On the sixth night, the scout pair failed to return. Then a second pair sent after them disappeared too. Cotta wanted to post guards in triple. Silenus refused. "We will not let shadows command the eagle," he said. But even his voice sounded thinner in the mist. At dawn, the trees parted and the land ahead opened into a shallow valley, ringed by low ridges and high stone formations. It was quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that remembers blood. And something in the men knew they were being watched. They heard it before they saw it. Not war drums, not horns, not shouts, just a scream. One voice, short and sharp, rising from the valley fog like a thread yanked too tight. Then silence again. Not even the echo came back. That, more than the scream itself, made the soldiers freeze. The 9th Legion had known ambushes before. In Gaul, in the Teutoburg forest, on roads soaked with rain and rebellion. They had protocols, response formations, strategies passed down through generations of marching. But this was not battle. This was subtraction. A slow peeling away of what they thought they controlled. Silenus barked orders. Cohorts shifted into defensive formations. Shields raised, pila ready. The eagle stood high, gleaming dull through the mist. Cotta moved to the front, scanning the ridgelines with narrowed eyes. Rufus, clutching the eagle tighter than ever, whispered a curse meant to bind fate. It didn't. Another scream, this time from the rear. A second voice, then silence again. No charge came. No visible enemy. Just the wind shifting, bringing with it a sound none of them had heard before. Bone and horn. Hollow and rising in pitch, like breath being forced through something that should never make sound. Then the first javelin struck. It came from nowhere. From above, from behind. It pierced a young legionary just under his collarbone. He fell before he shouted. His shield didn't even drop, it leaned with him, like the two were carved from the same breathless wood. The 9th reacted with perfect form. That's what made it worse, because form meant they still believed it was a battle. That there were lines, flanks, that someone would emerge from the fog to be fought. But no one came, only more javelins, arcing, precise, than the rocks. Stones hurled by hand or sling, some the size of fists, some sharp as blades. Not random. Targeted. One struck a centurion's helmet and split it open like an egg. Another cracked a horse's knee, sending rider and mount crashing into a line of shields. Then the whistles. High-pitched, patterned. A language they didn't know, but somehow understood, meant, "We see you." It meant, "We're not here to conquer." It meant, "We will take you one by one." The legion tried to reposition. Cotta led his men in a rotation maneuver, forming a defensive circle at the valley's heart. The standard was pulled to the center. A few officers demanded a charge into the hills to break the unseen line. Silenus refused. We hold, because the 9th did not retreat. The 9th did not panic. The 9th endured. But even endurance has a heartbeat. And when night fell, the fog didn't lift, it thickened. Campfires were lit low and fast. Tents were raised, but no one slept. The wounded moaned. The dead lay unburied. There was no time. No safety in ceremony. Just exhaustion disguised as discipline. Cotta took first watch, then second. Then never left the line. His hands shook slightly when he tightened the chin strap of his helmet. Not from fear, but from the recognition of something he couldn't name. Something no manual had prepared him for. Rufus cleaned the eagle again. Not for protection, not for pride. Just because it was the only thing he could do that still made sense. Silenus sat alone by a dying fire. The wind brushed ash across his boots. In his lap, he held a scroll. Blank. No report. No message. Because what could he write? We are here. We are surrounded. But by what, we do not know. That night, they heard voices. Not Latin, not Celtic, not any tongue known to empire or province. Just ... syllables, distant, not shouted, whispered in patterns. Some said they came from the trees. Others said they came from beneath the earth. And before dawn, another cohort was gone. No bodies, no weapons. Just empty bedrolls and one shield left stuck in the mud, upright, as if planted. 20 men, erased. The 9th stood, but thinner, quieter, not broken, but cracking. And when the sun tried to rise, It didn't. Just more fog, more cold, and a growing sense that they were not in enemy territory anymore. They were in someone else's memory. At first, Silenus believed it was still recoverable, that the cohorts had scattered, not vanished, that the fog had broken lines, not broken men. Roman legions had weathered worse. Germanic ambushes, desert marches, siege famine. He had trained for confusion. What he had not trained for, what none of them had wise absence. By the 8th day, the 9th was no longer whole. 2 full cohorts had failed to return from flank patrols. The camp was silent except for the breathing of exhausted men and the distant crack of branches that never answered when called. The engineers stopped measuring distance. Maps made no sense. Compass stones pointed nowhere. The land had turned. Trees leaned differently now. Shadows moved the wrong way. Some swore the stars had shifted constellations missing or reassembled into signs that didn't exist. But still, they remained. Because Rome didn't retreat, not from tribes, not from terrain, certainly not from fear. But Cotta began to whisper what the others only dared think. We are not facing an army. We are facing a will. That word will spread faster than orders. It wasn't madness. It wasn't faith. It was recognition. That this forest wasn't just geography. That this silence wasn't passive. That they were not being chased. They were being chosen. At night, men still vanished. Always 1 or 2. Never during the watch. Always between steps. Some had left boots behind. One left his own fingers curled around his gladius, but not the rest of him. Rufus, the standard-bearer, now slept fully armored, standing against the eagle's pole. He no longer cleaned it. He just held it. As if weight alone could anchor meaning. The men stopped asking where they were. The question had become meaningless. There were no roads anymore, no trail to follow. Even their own footprints seemed to shift, to vanish overnight. Cotta tried doubling patrols. One patrol never came back. The next brought back a helmet filled with rain, but the man who'd worn it hadn't gone into rain. Silenus finally gathered the remaining officers. 27 men, once nearly 5,000. Now, barely half remained, fewer whole. He laid out 2 choices. Hold, form a final perimeter, signal for help. Or move, abandon the sick, the carts, even the dead end, try to break south. They argued, loudly, harshly. Some wept as they did it, not from fear, but from shame. Because neither option held Rome, neither looked like honor, only survival. And Rome had never trained them to survive, only to conquer. The vote never came. That night, the eagle was taken, not destroyed, not broken, just gone. Rufus swore he had not moved, that his hands were still around it when the mist rose. But when the fog cleared, he was kneeling, arms empty. The pole had been severed clean at the base. No footprints, no drag marks. Just earth pressed down where the eagle once stood. The men fell to their knees not to grieve, because they no longer knew where to look. It was more than a symbol. It was orientation. It was their axis, their direction. Without it, they were not a legion. They were just men, lost in a land that did not want names. Silenus said nothing for hours. When he finally stood, his eyes were dry but distant. We move, not for Rome, not for glory, not even for survival, but because to stay would be to surrender to something they could not fight. And Romans only moved forward. They left the camp at dawn. No formation, no ranks, just one narrow line through the trees, following no road. The trees watched them go, and the wind stopped blowing. They moved, but not together. The last formation of the 9th dissolved 1 footstep at a time. No trumpets sounded. No signal was given. But the rhythm was gone. Some men marched in silence. Others whispered to themselves. Some walked barefoot, armor stripped, saying it was too heavy, that it didn't belong here. Silenus led from the front, or what passed for a front. He no longer looked back, not from pride, from necessity. If he turned too often, he might see how few still followed, or who still had their minds. The forest had changed again. Thinner, stranger. The trees now leaned inward, as though trying to listen. They passed landmarks that made no sense, stone altars carved in unfamiliar symbols, piles of antlers arranged like sentries. They avoided them without being told. No one touched anything. At night, fire gave no warmth. One soldier tried to burn a broken shield. The flames turned blue and hissed. Another swore he saw his own reflection in the smoke, but older, gaunter mouth sewn shut. The men began to speak less. Latin faded from their lips. Some muttered in provincial tongues they hadn't used since childhood. Some stopped speaking at all. Communication became nods, glances, gestures made with fingers that trembled. Then came the first break. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't desertion. It was surrender, but not to an enemy. 5 men refused to move further. They sat beneath a twisted oak and simply said, "Here is where we end." No argument, no violence. Cotta wanted to drag them forward. Silenus said, "Let them be." So they left them behind. That night, wolves howled. By the 3rd day of the march, they were down to less than 2 centuries. The carts had long been abandoned. Only what they carried remained, blades dull, bread moldy, water gone brackish. Yet no one starved. Hunger itself seemed irrelevant now. Men had begun to lose time. Rufus disappeared in the evening fog. Some said he went to search for the eagle. Others said he walked backward into the mist, smiling. The next morning, his boots were found hanging from a branch above the trail, polished, empty. Cotta tried to rally them. He told stories of past campaigns, of victories won against odds. He shouted the names of fallen comrades like incantations. But the men didn't respond, not because they disagreed, but because they no longer recognized the idea of winning. Winning against what? Silenus changed too. He stopped giving orders. He walked slower, not from fatigue, but from listening. Sometimes he would pause mid-step and tilt his head, as if waiting for something only he could hear. His face no longer carried command, it carried witness. One evening, he gathered the officers. What remained of the man spoke in low voice. No one remembered the exact words, only that it ended with, "If we are to be remembered, let it be in silence." That night, the fog returned thicker than ever. It curled through tents, coated blades, entered lungs. Some men dreamed of home. Others dreamed of Rome burning, not in flames, but in sand. Blown apart grain by grain until nothing remained but silence and marble. By morning, half the men were gone. Some had vanished. Others had wandered off during the night. One was found sitting beside a tree, hands pressed against his own eyes. He said they had shown him things, but he couldn't say who they were, only that they used no time. Silenus stood among the remains and said nothing. Not grief, not rage. Just a nod, like a man confirming the last line of a prophecy. Then he turned north again. Cotta followed. So did what little was left. No one spoke the word legion anymore. It no longer applied. They reached it near dusk. A clearing that should not have existed, ringed by stone pillars older than the names of gods. The earth there was unnaturally flat, as though leveled by hands too large, too deliberate. No birds flew overhead. No roots dared break the ground. The few remaining soldiers stood at its edge, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from something deeper. Something cellular. Every part of them screamed, "Do not enter." And yet they did. Silenus went first. He walked into the center without armor, without sword. Just his sandals and the dirt. His back was straight, his head held high. Not as a general. Not as a Roman. just as a man who knew this was the end of the road. He looked around, eyes searching not for enemy, but for meaning. Kata followed. Behind him came the scattered remnants men who no longer marched in step, but drifted, pulled by something no commander had taught them. They didn't set up camp, didn't speak, just stood in that strange stillness, waiting for something to arrive. Then the air changed. It did not grow colder, did not grow darker. It grew thinner. It's like breath had to fight to stay in the lungs, like light had to decide what shapes to reveal. And then they came. Not from the trees, not from the hills, from nowhere. From between. Shapes that were not men but wore the suggestion of men. Tall, wrapped in furs and bone. Faces smeared with earth, or was it ash? Eyes not glowing, but reflecting something that wasn't there. They did not charge. They did not shout. They simply appeared, surrounding the clearing like a second ring of stone. Silenus did not draw his blade. It didn't even raise his voice. He stepped forward once, raised his hand, palm out. Universal gesture. We come without war. The shapes did not respond. One moved, just a shift of weight. And that movement alone made two soldiers collapse, legs gone, spirit gone, not dead. Just ... undone. Their minds could no longer hold shape. Kata stepped forward next to Silenus. For a second, the two stood shoulder to shoulder, like they had done on so many campaigns. But here, there was no banner, no drums, just breath. Just the pounding of heartbeats, trying to remember why they mattered. And then Silenus spoke. He did not speak Latin, not Greek, not any tongue recorded in scroll or marble. What left his mouth sounded like stone grinding against wind. Like a river remembering its first bed. The sounds didn't belong to him. His eyes did not blink. His mouth did not blink. His mouth did not move in syllables, but in shape. Like memory being read aloud. The creatures responded, not with words, but with silence that changed temperature, the kind that curled fingernails. That made teeth feel loose. A silence that made the rest of the men fall to their knees, not from reverence, but from disassembly, piece by piece. The Roman inside them unknit. Kata reached for his sword, but found nothing. His scabbard was empty, or never there, or no longer real. And then, light. Not bright, but wide. A glow from beneath the earth, rising through cracks that hadn't been there a moment ago. Red, then white, then colorless. Not fire, not sun. Something older. Silenus stepped into it. He did not burn, he did not scream. He vanished, like breath into winter. A god. Called out, but his voice made no sound. The figures turned, and in a single ripple, retreated, not running, not walking. Just no longer being there. The clearing dimmed. The light folded in on itself. The stone pillars remained. But the 9th Legion did not. Only a few remained standing. Fewer still knew where they were. Even fewer remembered who they were. And the sun did not rise the next day. It simply began again, without color, without sound. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell over the very soil that once held the 9th. Roads were built across it. Some following old Roman lines, others diverging where the forest refused to forget. Historians debated. Generals wondered. The 9th had marched north and then vanished. No final battle, no survivors. Just silence, written into every page as a question. What happened? Some said they had been slaughtered by the Caledonians. Others believed they had deserted, melted into the tribes. One theory claimed they had marched into the highlands and founded a hidden colony. But none of these theories held weight. No bones, no shields, no coins, not even a whisper from those who lived there. As if the earth itself had sealed their passage like a wound. And then, in the 17th century, a letter surfaced. Found in the base of a crumbling tower in Northumbria, buried beneath stone and rust, wrapped in rotted leather. Its Latin was coarse, weathered, but legible. The signature M. Cata, no title, no rank, just a name. It read, "We walked beyond where roads end, past language, past name. The world grew thin there. Our commands no longer echoed. Our blades held no weight. The eagle is gone, not stolen, not lost. Taken by what cannot be taken from, seeliness entered something I cannot name. And I remained. I do not know why. Rome does not end with blood. It ends with forgetting. If this is found, do not come looking. The forest remembers. We were not defeated. We were rewritten. Most scholars dismissed it as forgery. A monk's fantasy, a war-weary poet's invention. But one detail lingered, one not known to the world until then. The ninth had carried a unique eagle, one whose talons were bent slightly inward, unlike any other. That detail had never been recorded outside the Legion itself. And yet, the letter described it perfectly. So they searched again. A new expedition into the mists north of the wall. Drones, soil scans, LiDAR, nothing. Just forest, just wind and echoes. One archaeologist claimed their equipment once picked up faint metal deep underground, then lost it. Another said they heard whispers in a dead language while walking alone. All inconclusive. But in 2023, a satellite captured an image during an atmospheric anomaly, brief clearing in heavy fog. In a glade no map had marked, something stood. 12 pillars, one circle, and at the center, what appeared to be a shadow. Man-shaped, tall, upright. Facing south, when they returned the next day, the clearing was gone, and the shadow had never cast light again. So the ninth remains lost, not fallen, not buried, just folded away. Like a page removed from the history of men and written into the memory of something far older. Every story leaves behind a clue, not just about the past, but about language too. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories told in clear English with subtitles. Thank you, and until next time, keep wondering, keep learning, keep listening.